Wow, it is unseasonably chilly here in North Carolina where I am today. I don't know what's going on. It's crazy. Thank you for joining me for Photoshop for Artists. Today, we're not going to do so much drawing. Instead, what we're going to talk about is things you can do after you've done drawing or kind of in the process of really refining the work that you're doing to get the colors and the values to look the way you want, along with a couple of other little goodies in there. But what we're talking about today, in short, is blending modes and image adjustments, okay? And these come in really handy if you're an illustrator. So because this show is aimed squarely at people who do draw and paint in Photoshop, we're not going to cover all the myriad ways that you could do this in Photoshop. And believe me, there are dozens and dozens of ways to adjust the color, the saturation, the values, etc., and those relationships in your artwork, in your photos, in Photoshop, of course. And like many things in Photoshop, there are lots of ways to do the same thing. What we're going to do today is just focus on those that are used most frequently by people who draw and paint in Photoshop, illustrators, okay? And so that's what we're going to do. Let's say hi to some folks who are joining us. I see Cryo is here, and Uriel, and Katerina, and Steve, and I see Roberto. Nice to join us, Roberto. Thank you very much. Afroha and Daria are here as well. What's up, Sam? Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. And Jack and Becca. Everybody who is watching over on Behance, that's be.net/Adobe Live. If you're watching over on YouTube or on Twitter or elsewhere, remember that I'm following the live chat at Behance. Okay, time to move over to Photoshop. Let's take a look first at a photograph. This is in lovely Heidelberg, Germany, where I was in September with the family. And just so happened to be a drizzly day. That first day we were there, only for about an hour, and then when it cleared, look, we had a lovely rainbow. Now, I've taken this photograph, and I don't want to talk about photographs today, not much, not at all, actually, but the reason I am pulling this up as the first image we're going to talk about today is just to very quickly and easily explain a couple of basic adjustment layers for you and adjustment modes for you, for your hue and saturation, for brightness and contrast, for levels, and for curves and some other things. Okay, so we're going to look at those. It's easy to understand them when you're looking at a photo. So if you've ever owned an iPhone, and I'm sure many of you out there do, then you know that you can, with your camera, if you take a photo of something, you can open up your photo and edit it right there on the camera with a couple of different things you can do. But there's also this sort of little magic wand, this way to just kind of automatically make the image look good. Well, now where do you think they got that idea from? You know Adobe's been doing this for a long time. So before we get into all the many, many blending modes and ways of working with your image, we're going to look at some really simple stuff, okay, that you can just do with one shot. Now, keep in mind that what I'm about to show you is destructive. And what I mean by that is I'm going to permanently change the pixels that are on this layer. Now, we are going to look at adjustment layers, okay, which are non-destructive, and it's going to be awesome. We're also going to look at using blending modes for your layers, and those are non-destructive as well. They can always be changed. But if you want to avoid working in a destructive fashion using what I'm about to show you, some very simple stuff, all you have to do, gang, is duplicate the layer. Couldn't be easier. Make a duplicate of a layer. Anytime you think, I might be doing something kind of funky here, I'm not sure if it's going to work out, go ahead and duplicate the layer, play around with it, do what you want, and if it doesn't work out, you haven't done anything wrong, you've still got the original. So that's a good habit to get into, all right? All of us need to do it more. There's nothing worse than making a whole string of changes to a layer, realizing things aren't working out, and then maybe running out of undos on the way back towards where you were. You don't want to do that, okay? So how do I make a duplicate? Command J. Boom. Simple as that. Command J. Now, if you're on a PC, you remember every time I say command, you think control. Control J. Alrighty. More folks are joining us. Hi, gang. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you. All right, we're going to roll on. We're going to roll on now. I see, by the way, our good friend Paco coming in. Loving this illustration, says Paco. Well, Paco, I did not paint it, but You know, very kind of you to say that. I'll just take credit for it. I did actually point my camera in the direction of the rainbow and hit, you know, the little round button. So I guess I get some credit. This could have been so much better composed. I mean, look at all the problems. You've been in my illustration master classes. You know all the issues we have here. Divided right in half. Boo. I was just trying to get that rainbow. These are fleeting moments. Okay, moving on. Here we go. Check it out. Go up here to Image and look at these three guys right here. Holy cow. These are the magic ones. You just hit auto tone and it's going to automatically tone that image to what Photoshop thinks. Now, I mean, I must have done an amazing job because it thinks it's perfect already. But if we go to auto contrast, same deal. If we go to auto color, oh, slight change there. Let's look at that. A little cooler on the rooftops. Before, after, before, after. So I guess Photoshop thought that needed to be a little bit cooler. All right. But that's what you can do if you want to have some quick, easy image adjustments. You don't even want to have to mess with any sliders or open up any menus and windows, etc. Just come over here to Image, Auto Tone, Auto Contrast, Auto Color. The word auto says it all, okay? So if that's all, for all the lazy folks out there, just want to see what happens, go for it. All right, but if you really want to get to work and use some of the things we're talking about today for blending modes and adjustment layers, let's first look at where you find these things. Now, because of the little bottom bar I have in Photoshop here when I'm streaming to you all, I'm going to change my window for a moment to ensure that you can all see the bottom of my layers panel right here, okay? Down here, follow my stylus, all right? And what you want to look for here is this little guy. It's a little circle, okay? And it's been bisected diagonally. And here you have a whole bunch of layer blending modes. Now, like I said up top, we're not going to go through every single one of these. We're going to go through what is the most commonly used for those people who draw and paint, okay? And to make it really easy to understand, we have this simple photo here to play with. All right, so let's start with brightness and contrast because that's one of the ones that people like to adjust all the time. Now, I want you to look here at my layer stack, all right? Going back to this viewing mode. Look right here. What we've done is we've actually added a layer for making these adjustments. And what that's telling me is that I'm going to work in a non-destructive way. It's also given me this nice little window I can drag around here. This is going to be my menu. And this menu will change depending on which adjustment layer I'm going to be working with. But for now, with brightness and contrast, you can see how easy it is for me simply to reduce the brightness or increase the brightness, etc. Reduce or increase the contrast. You've got those two separate sliders right there. Really nice and easy to work with, okay? So brightness and contrast, everyone's familiar with these. Very simple, very easy to adjust. But remember that I'm working non-destructively. What that means is if I come over here to this layer and I actually hide it, you'll still see our original content there. So when you're using adjustment layers, there is no need to go ahead and create duplicate layers of whatever it is that you're going to be adjusting. Don't worry about it. Photoshop already takes care of that with the adjustment layer for you. Okay, now what else do we have to play with in addition to brightness and contrast? Well, let's go ahead and hide this, come back to our original layer, and let's go down again. We're going to now use a different blending mode, and we're going to introduce levels. Many people are not familiar with how levels work. Now, with levels, what you're going to be adjusting is the darkest darks, the lightest lights, okay, highlights in other words, and the midtone values. You're not doing it in an extremely sophisticated way or complex way, but you do have some control over some things. And I'll show you first the most basic way to adjust things, and then I'll show you a little bit more advanced and more interesting way to mess with levels, okay? So let's say, for example, I'd like to push everything in this image, okay, a little bit more towards the light side, all right? Well, I can take the midtones, all right, and that's this little middle slider right here, okay? You'll notice we have a darkest slider, a slightly lighter gray, and then a white here. So this is telling me that this on the left is all my darks, okay? Here are my lights, and here are my midtones. Now I want you to look right here in this rectangle, and you're going to see an interesting pattern. Wherever you see a low, okay, and by low I mean towards the bottom of this rectangle, a low area that's been filled in with white, okay? the lower that little hill is, so to speak, okay, that means the less of that value there is in the overall image. So when looking at this image, okay, with dark darks right over here, like blacks and anything like 80% to 100% black, if you want to think of it in grayscale, there's really very little of that in this image. Almost everything you can see is sitting kind of in this vicinity right here, okay, which is about 60-70% black. And then the largest, okay, part, and that's mostly our sky, all right, and these lighter values on the buildings, are sitting right here. And then for brightest brights, we've got a few here and there as well. And those will be just little bits of white, little hits of white here and there. So that's giving us sort of a read on the values in that image. Now I want to push things lighter. I tap on any one of these sliders and I move it in one direction or another. Okay? Now, if I'm pushing towards the right, all right, right here, I'm taking these grays and I'm widening the space between black and our 50% gray. By widening that space, what I mean, and by expanding that, is I'm actually increasing the range of values, okay, that I want to darken, right? Because I'm expanding this area. What I'm doing is I'm shrinking the area, all right, in the image that's allowed to have these lighter pixels. So it's taking things and it's darkening them. So I want you to think about things moving in reverse. Okay, now if I expand the area here between white and 50% gray, it's going to take more of those pixels that are in the image that are 50% gray or darker, and it's going to include them in that range. Okay, and that's going to broaden the range and shrink the amount of space I have for my lights. All right, so that's how you mess with that. Now I can take my darks right here and I can compress everything in the image. See this? I'm moving my black point basically to where the 50% gray was. So what does that do? Well, that takes all the range of values in the entire image, shrinks them in half, which means all the darks, okay, that are maybe 50, 60, 70% are going to go way, way darker, right? We don't have a lot of room for our lights. Even within here, I can adjust things, even within this limited amount of space. Okay? You get the idea? Take the lights, push everything lighter, blow that all out right there. All right, now here's how you can be a little bit more picky with this stuff and more advanced. Let's say that you know where you want your midtone to be. All right, let's say that, for example, I want this area in the trees here to be my 50% gray, so to speak. I can use these eyedroppers and set a value there. So if I tap on the eyedropper here for my midtones, my 50% gray, and I come right over here and tap on the image, everything is going to readjust, okay, to suit that choice. Now this is actually a lot more powerful than just simply sliding things around, as you can see. Maybe for the whites, the brightest brights in the entire image, all right, maybe I want this area here, okay, where we have these triangular shaped windows, the little white trim there. If I tap on the white, watch what that's going to do. If I tap there, okay, everything else gets blown out because we have to readjust to that setting, all right? Command Z, you can always Command Z and Command Control Z or Command Shift Z, etc., to move your way backwards and forwards with your undo stack through these choices. All right, so that's levels. You want to be able to set things specifically or drag in here, etc., and play around with what you can do. Now, why is this good for illustration? Well, let's take a look at one, okay? So here I have the illustration I did for my pal Renee, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to adjust, okay, levels. All right, now remember what I said about setting a white point, right? So maybe what I want to do is I want to make everything in the image slightly lighter. Okay, I can tap on the white eyedropper right here. And currently what I have for a very light value is this very light blue in here. Okay, if you can all see that. If I just tap on that, everything gets brighter. Okay, based on that choice. Tap again, you can see that happening. All right, So with my levels, now remember, this is non-destructive. I can look before, after, before, after. So I can make a setting like that. Now I can undo that. I could come in here and I can just lighten things up this way. Hang on a minute, there we go. I can also push a little darker from the mids. I can come a little brighter up from the top end, a little darker from here, a little brighter from here. Make subtle adjustments to my illustration when all is said and done, all right? But if you want real subtlety, then you want to go to curves, play with curves. So let's see what we can do with curves. I'm going to come down again for an adjustment layer, and we're going to add one for curves. It's right under levels right here. All right, now for curves, I want you to take a look. We have another one of these sort of graphs, if you will. And this time it's showing me again from my darkest darks, which are the bottom left corner of this graph, to my lightest lights in the top right corner. Now what's awesome about curves is you can be really specific about which range of values as well as which range of colors, hues, you want to adjust in your image, all right? So just starting with the basics here, the overall image, right? Let's say that I want to bring everything in the image slightly up, starting from my midpoint, okay, and then evening out all the way up towards the highest, brightest bright down to the darkest dark. I can tap in the middle right here, and that adds a little anchor point there, and then drag it upwards. And you'll see everything brightening up nicely. Okay, see that? And now let's go the other direction. Everything darkening up slightly. Okay? If I pull to the left, same as before, I'm expanding that area from the 50% gray over to our white, right? But we have a lot more control here of how that's going to happen. And this is all just with one anchor point. Now I want to show you something crazy you can do with curves. Let's say, okay, that I just want to adjust everything that's kind of in this little area here, which is sort of my 70% to 80% gray. Maybe I want all that stuff to get a little lighter. Watch this. I tap once here and I tap once here and kind of give myself a little space right here to adjust and pull that stuff up. Pull it up, brighten it. Okay? I can get really specific. Now notice what it's doing. It's adjusting everything else, okay? But I can tap on any one of those and adjust accordingly. Tap and realign all the rest of these points so that only this one section here is going to get modified. If you've ever used the pen tool in Photoshop or Illustrator, then you'll be familiar with what it feels like to work with anchor points and adjust the curve. So now I have this new adjustment. So if I go here, before, after, you can see how just those darker darks, okay, that were the line work and some of the darker shadows on some of these figures, that all by itself has been isolated and lightened in value. Okay, so curves allow you to be really specific. All right, so we'll undo back to where we were. So here's our original setting now. We're back to nothing. And I want you to see that you can also select channels, red, green, and blue. Okay, so let's, for example, go to our reds. And now I'm only going to work with the red channel. All right, so that means any of the areas, okay, any of the pixel data that has some red in it. If I want to darken up those areas, I can just pull that down. Okay, and it's actually going to adjust it more as a color. See that? Like so. Kablamo. And I can also do this. I can pull up the red and really oversaturate anything that has red in it as well. Think of it like depletion, addition. Depletion, addition. All right? And remember that you're still dealing with the same range of values. So if I wanted to get really picky and say that I only want the reds to get more red and more intense in the darker values, okay, then I could just set right here a little point, and then in this little spot just pull it way up, and then get this all back to normal here. I'm not doing a very good job with this. Hang on a minute. There we go. Like so. So look what that did. It took all the darkest darks right here, and I pulled all that red up in this direction, right? And so that made those dark darks really, really red. See what I mean? So there are lots of times where you want to be really picky with your color adjustments, with your brights, your darks, your midtones, etc. in your drawing. And you can do that with curves. Now, if we jump back to the photo I have here, I believe it's this one, we can go ahead and we can add an adjustment layer for curves. So we'll go to curves. And here, if I just want to make everything a little darker, I can just pull down from the middle. See how nice that is? And a common thing people do is make a sort of an S-curve. So I'll pull the midtones down, then pull the values up a little in the lights, and pull the highlights up a little bit, like this. I could do the opposite. I could come this way. S-curves allow you to adjust really, really precisely in your image, etc. Here we've got the 75% grays coming down a little bit, and about the 25% whites coming up a little bit, okay, or grays I should say, for more contrast. You can get really specific with this. Very fun. And again, I'm not going to show you everything that you do for photography, but for illustration, mainly the things that we use the most. And I use the heck out of curves. Levels, not so much. I want you to know what they are, but I very rarely use them, to be honest. I'm always going for curves. Curves I just find to be a little bit more sophisticated and easier for me to work with when I'm doing drawings. All right, so let's switch it up to an image like this, all right, where we've got a much more limited palette, but we still have a full range of values. Okay, and if you want to see those values, you go ahead and pull up a curves adjustment, and you'll see right here, right, where we're concentrated more in the darks, but we have everything going for it right there. And here again, I can just brighten things up, I can darken things, right, etc. And what I want to show you here now is we're gonna mess with color balance. Okay, so color balance and hue and saturation adjustments, they're both similar to one another, but I'll show you how they're different. Okay, we'll go again, and we're going to add right now a hue and saturation, and we're going to add a color balance so we can have those to compare. All right, so starting with color balance, I want you to think about color balance in really simple terms. Which way do you want to go with the reds in your image, the greens in your image, and the blues in your image? Simple as that. Think RGB. Now, do I want any area of this image that has red in it to be more red, or do I want to go to its opposite color? And you'll see the opposites for those RGB colors right here: cyan, magenta, and yellow. Okay, so let's say, for example, with the reds, this has a lot of red in it, a lot of orange. You see all the oranges and the browns, etc. Maybe I want to cool all that down. So what do? I push more towards the cyan. Look what that does. Cools all that red down. See this? By the way, for anybody who's a brush fan, this was painted with the Oil Rich brush, Oil Rich, from the winter, I think, 2023 brush update. Let me double check on that for you. But pretty sure it's the winter update. So if we go down here to our updates and look at winter 2023. It might actually be the spring 2023. Let's try that one. Is it fall 2022? Oh, Kyle doesn't know his brushes. When did I do this? I know. Here it is, summer 2022. Time flies. It was almost a year ago, gang. Here you go. Rich Oil 22B specifically is the brush I use to paint this. That'll give you a little bit of color dynamics, some really nice textures, and some good painterly action there for you. Some little happy accidents here and there. If you paint really, really lightly with it, you also get a little bit of canvas texture. All right, so back to our adjustments. You'll notice that I cooled everything down simply by taking the reds and pushing them more towards the cyans. And we go right back to where we were. You can see the difference, okay? But another easy way to do the difference comparison is simply go ahead and make the change. And remember, because this is non-destructive, I can simply hide that layer at any moment and compare where we've come, okay, to where we were. Simple as that. Now the same goes for everything else in the image, all right? So if we return this back to 0, and we look, that there's also a lot of yellow, obviously, in any of these areas that have orange. If we push those blue, look what happens. Pretty nice. The beautiful thing about color balance, I find personally, is that the way that the adjustments are made to the colors, because things are being adjusted kind of across the board, the way that you're going to see the adjustments happen is still going to retain some really nice balance in the relationships of one color to another. And I think this is one of the benefits of it. Another thing you might notice, though, if I just pull this back, all right, the way that color balance is working is that we're not seeing any changes to our value structure. Now, this is not necessarily something that you always want. Most of the time you do, but here if you see preserve luminosity, if I turn preserve luminosity off, Photoshop will no longer really recognize or care about the value structure in the same way, and as a result, okay, you can see here, for example, as I lighten things up, the values here have gotten a little lighter than they were, okay? And that's because we're not using the preserve luminosity. See the difference? Turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. So there are times where you want to be pushing more towards a color, and if that color is lighter than the color that you already had set for it, or other colors in the image happen to be lighter than the colors that you are going to be pushing more towards or away from, the adjustment will take that into consideration and not retain the same value structure. Good to know. All right, so again, I can do a little comparison before, after, and that's your color balance. Now let's take a look at hue and saturation, okay? So here we have a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and you'll notice that the options I have are different here. Now what's interesting about hue and saturation is you can take literally every color in the entire document and you can push it, okay, at the same time in a direction. Think about your color wheel. You're moving all the way to the left, moving all the way to the right. Imagine all the colors following along with you at the same time, okay? So for example, if I'm starting with blue and I start to move counterclockwise, I'm gonna move more towards the pinks and the reds and so on. And if you look over here at my color wheel, you can see that happening. If I'm here at a blue, okay, and I start moving this way, right? Imagine that I'm starting here and I'm moving this far. Well, if I'm here, I'm gonna move that far. If I'm here, I'm gonna move that far. If I'm here, I'm gonna move that far. Literally every color in the document will move exactly the same distance across the color wheel. So if I come over to my hue and saturation sliders and just adjust hue like this, that's what's happening. Everything is moving at the same time, okay? So every color is traveling along the color wheel the same distance. That's what's going on there. So we've just pushed it a long ways. But what's interesting again about this is you are maintaining a kind of relationship between all these colors, and you can get a pretty interesting result sometimes. And for me, I find with illustration, I often am a little stuck with color experimentation and trying things that are a bit more funky or maybe unexpected or interesting. And with that being the case, I can sometimes just open up the hue saturation sliders and I can push that hue and see what happens. And I'll oftentimes discover something I never would have found in the first place because I just didn't have the imagination for it, or frankly, the expert knowledge of color relationships and color theory to try a color relationship out like that in the first place, okay? Know your limitations. I know mine. This really helps me, okay? So let's push that back. All right, now we go the other way. Got some other interesting stuff happening here. Now this is a very simple painting with very simple color palette. What happens if you do this with something a bit more crazy? So here we've got more complementary colors, right? We've got reds playing against greens and blues, more or less, or the blues are quite green, right? But if we were to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer to this, right, and start pushing, you'll see how interesting things get as all those colors move at the same time. Now that to me is a really funky, weird, cool image, all right? Let's go the other way. Everything moving, everything changing. Look at that. That's pretty cool. And because, again, everything's moving at the same time in one direction or another, you're still going to maintain these weird, good relationships. All right? And there you go, back to that and back to where we started. Right? You can try that with something like this. Now, this is full of, again, complementary relationships, right? But a lot more midtones, bigger range of values than something like this. Go ahead and push the hue and saturation. Look at that. Pretty nice. Oh, I like it right there. That's pretty nice. Okay. All right, what we haven't talked about yet is, after all, it's called hue and saturation. What happens if I make an adjustment? Okay, let's go this way, for example, and I go, dang, that is some pretty intense color with those magentas there, right? What if I take the saturation down? Well, that's why we have this little slider right here. I can reduce that saturation. That looks a bit less intense, less crazy. But remember that we are adjusting the saturation on all the colors. There are times where I don't want to do that. Maybe I just want to adjust those crazy, crazy magentas. Well, look at this. You can actually adjust here specific primaries. Okay, now in Photoshop, I want you to always think of the primaries being 6 colors: RGB, C, Y, M. Okay, RGB, red, green, blue. Okay, C, Y, M, cyan, yellow, magenta. Those are your 6. So let's take these magentas and let's knock that saturation down a little bit. Actually, it looks like I need to adjust not necessarily the magentas so much as probably the reds. Let's give those a try. Oh, I just realized something. The original, you have to look at the original image. So the original, it's mostly, I would say, yellow. That's the channel I want to adjust there. So let's come back here and we'll go to our yellows. There we go. And reduce that saturation. Now look what happens. See that? We went from this to that. Okay, so you're adjusting what's in the original image. I forgot about that. And then that's a lot more balanced. Okay, now I've made that change to the saturation. That's going to stick for the yellows, okay? So now when I come back, all right, and I go to my master settings again for the entire image and start to play, all right, with other settings, all right, those yellows are going to remain less intense, all right, all the way through. So their relationship is going to be affected by that change that I made. All right. And finally, lightness. Okay, well, you can actually lighten the whole image if you want, or you can be very specific and very picky with certain colors. All right, so let's come back here, for example, and let's go ahead and say, all right, I want to adjust maybe, let's look at our original image. I don't know, maybe the reds, I want to take them down a notch. All right, so we'll come back here and we'll go to the reds and we'll take them and we'll say, okay, we're going to darken those reds up a little bit. All right, look at I want you to look carefully at the tree trunks here, so to speak. Okay. There you go. All right, you can also brighten them up. Oh, that's kind of cool. Didn't expect that, like that. All right. Now, is this destructive? Nope. I'm just playing around, but I haven't done anything bad to my original layer. It's all good in the hood. Okay, see that? Happy times. Kyle, do these work with masks? Well, of course they do. But of course. What if you want to keep the eyes just like they are? Well, let's come over here. Turn back on our little adjustment layer, and directly to the right you see a big white rectangle. That is in fact a mask. So if I grab my elliptical marquee tool, make a little selezione right there, and another one, oops, another one right here, kablamo, okay, and I want to make it so that this area is not taking advantage of the adjustments I've just made. Then I need to fill it with black, okay, fill that area with black, because black is where you're hiding information and white is where you're revealing information. Okay, so I did a little command delete. If you're on a PC, that would be control delete. And now my mask has two little black circles right where the eyes are, and I get to keep those little pink eyes like that. Alrighty, gang? Yes, Umacorn, Renee, our good pal Renee. Of course. Let's see, any questions? Want to make sure nobody's got questions here. Roberto, you're also in North Carolina. That's nice. That's nice. Lizette from Amsterdam. Uriel from Mexico. How nice. Cool, cool, cool. All right, so loving the deep dive. Great, Becca. So glad, so glad. All right, let's move on to the next. Okay, here we've got our little friendly fox illustration. I don't remember why I made this or when, but I like it. So we're going to take this fox and we're going to now look at, we've done all the hue and saturation, color balance, curves, and levels. Let's take a look at Vibrance. So Vibrance is one of my favorites, and this maybe isn't the best image to use for this. So let me just look at something else here for a minute. I want to go back to that photo. No, here's a good one. Look at my friend the tiger here. All right, so the way Vibrance works, and this is such a great image adjustment. Imagine that you only want to increase the saturation of colors that are less saturated. So the problem with adjusting saturation on the master level, the master slide level, with hue and saturation sliders is that, well, if you have colors that are already saturated, you might blow them out and make them so saturated that they're kind of gross. Okay, coffee time. So here comes Vibrance to the rescue. So if you look at this image right here, okay, I do have some areas in the background there that are a little less saturated. Now if I just use my little clicker here to select these colors, you'll see we're sitting at about this level of saturation. Yeah. And here, okay, we're only at about maybe 30% saturation, moving from left to right. That's how we think about our sat. Okay, over here, same. Okay, even the orangey brown bits here, not the most exciting. And that's okay, this is all very balanced, but just as a great example of how you can do this, I want you to see what happens when we adjust our Vibrance, okay? So I'm just gonna start pushing Vibrance to the right. And what it has done, I pushed all the way to 100, okay? Let's go ahead and turn that on and off. See that? So great. Only the colors that were less saturated, okay? This is a really nice, subtle, sophisticated adjustment. Only the colors that are less saturated have been pushed, okay, to a more saturated state. So nice. Now, of course, if I do this, if I push the saturation slider, well, that does the same thing we'd expect as what happens with our hue saturation sliders. So I don't use ever the saturation really with Vibrance. What I do with Vibrance is I just push the Vibrance right there. Now you can go the other way too, look at that. That's gonna suck the saturation out of this thing, right? But it does it again in a very sophisticated, subtle way. Really great, really nice. This is a great adjustment layer. Another thing I like about all of these adjustment layers is that because they are their own individual layer, you can stack them. So you can do multiple adjustments to an image. If I want to push the Vibrance up right here to maybe like 50% on this image, we'll do a little before after kind of thing. Before after, very subtle but very nice. I can then go ahead and I can add another, all right, for example, let's go hue sat, and let's push a little bit this way, or a little bit that way. See that? You can make these little adjustments, or major adjustments, but I like pushing it a little bit more towards the yellow. That's kind of fun, right? Or I could do a little color balance action. Let's try that. Go to color balance. Okay, maybe I want to take all of my blues and push them a little more yellow. Make that forest feel a bit more lush. See that? Really nice. That didn't even mess with the tiger, right? But look what happened there. Isn't that nice? So you can stack these babies. Stack them, stack them, stack them. But there's Vibrance for you. Vibrance is fun. Okay. Alrighty, so let's see where we are on time. I think we have just enough time now to, just enough time to look at a couple more things. I want to talk about blending modes for you, which you're really going to use a lot when you're drawing. It's really awesome. All right, so let's go to another illustration here. So here we have our friend Van Gogh. This was painted with one of the Impressionist brushes in the Impressionist brush set, which you can grab as well. So go ahead and grab that one and play around with it. Okay. And now we're going to look at one more adjustment layer, and then we'll look at blending modes. So let's go ahead and open our adjustment layers, and we want to look at this one right here, gang. Black and white. Why would you use this? All right, so you think, well, Kyle, I can always just go up to my image, adjust, and I can desaturate an image right there. But no, we don't want you to do that. So what's amazing about the black and white image adjustment is that it actually lets you create a black and white image, but be really picky about the relationships that are actually happening with the colors, okay, with their values. So look, here are my reds. See that? If I take my reds, okay, I can darken them up, and only the reds, all right, are going to get darker. So what I can really do is create a black and white image, but have total control over the tones, over the values in that image. See this? So I can adjust this to have a lot more surface texture, surface action, contrast in the areas that need it, contrast in the areas, less contrast where I don't want the contrast, etc. So I can really go to town with this. And that's the difference between taking something and simply desaturating it or adjusting these colors accordingly, right? I have total control over all that good stuff. So look at the difference between this and here. If I take this and duplicate it and we go image, adjust, desaturate. Ugh, is that what you want to do with this image? Oh my goodness sakes. I know you don't. This is what you want to do, right? You want to control all those relationships. So that, my friends, is black and white, and that is a really powerful image adjustment layer that I recommend you try. All right, let's take a look now at blending modes. All right. Whoops, this is what I'm looking for. There we go. All right, what are blending modes for layers? Layer blending modes. Well, every time you create a new layer, if you look at this right here, you have a whole drop-down menu of all of these blending modes, okay? Which I believe there are at least 25. It's a lot. And this can be a little intimidating, a little weird, and you don't know what they do. But as someone who draws, there are only a few that you're really going to have to mess with that often, okay, and take advantage of. And I want to also tell you that one of the great things about blending modes is that they're not only living here in your layers panel. They are, in fact, something you can play around with using brushes. How cool is that? So, just as a quick demo, I'll show you a little something here. If I, for example, have some blue on my brush, and let's go ahead and grab that rich oil brush that we were playing with for that other painting. Put some blue down, okay? And let's say I create a new layer, all right? And I grab some yellow, nice lemony yellow right here, right there. and I paint over it like this. Now, if I drop down here and say multiply, okay, changing my blend mode to multiply, it's taking the information from the original layer and then the blend layer, and it's combining the two, and it's always going to darken whatever the result is, but it's also going to have those colors mixed with one another to create what you see here. But I'm doing this on two separate layers. What happens if I want to do that on the same layer? Well, look here. If I go to my mode for my brush, I also have these options. So if I select multiply, ta-da! What about that? And the cool thing is, if I do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again, look what's happening to that area in the middle. Darker and darker and darker and darker. It's using that blend mode with every stroke of the brush. All right, so it's cool to be able to paint something, paint again, and use a blend mode with your brush. So don't forget, once I'm through showing you all these blend modes, think about ways you can use it for a brush. And don't forget, folks, bonus tip, that for any brush except for mixer brushes, you can, in fact, under your blending modes, select the mode for clear, and that turns your brush into an eraser with the same properties and the same goodness. Okay, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. So don't forget about that. If you have a North American keyboard, you can always just leave your brush on normal, and you can hold down the tilde key. The tilde key, okay, which looks like this. I should probably use a darker color. That little thing in the top left corner of your keyboard. That will, if you hold it down, temporarily trigger that clear mode for your brush. Okay. Alrighty, so let's take a look at blending modes. Here we go. And it's easy for me to do this with color. Alright, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. So for the basic ones, we can just use a color, create a new layer here. Let's look at our blending modes. So we already looked at multiply, okay? What does multiply do? So if I grab some red, put it over this yellow, it's gonna darken it, okay? But it's also gonna mix those two colors. So the red area in here, this brownish area it created, is gonna be a little more on the yellow side. All right, understand what's happening there. Now, let's take a look at what happens if I change this to color burn. What happened? Here's the answer. There are certain colors or values, okay, on the original layer that are going to render the blend layer, okay, pixels transparent with certain blending modes. Now, if you look at color burn, okay, what happened is that because I have white on the canvas, okay, on the layer underneath the blending mode, the original layer with the yellow on it, the white renders whatever I'm painting on top and the layer above it transparent, okay? That's just the relationship that this has. And there are certain other blending modes that do the same thing. And so if you think about multiply and think about color burn, the two differences are, one, with multiply, colors are all going to be the same. Everything's going to just work. The difference being that if I have white on the multiply layer, well, that's going to be transparent because it can't do anything to darken the colors that are underneath it. Okay, white will not darken anything. But with color burn, you'll notice there's also a difference in the intensity of the contrast right here. So I want you to see what happens if I go back to multiply. See that? Look at the area where the two layers are interacting. Now let's go to color burn. Woof, very different, okay? More contrast. Think about the darks being pushed darker, the lights being pushed lighter, and the mid-tones as well, you know, one way or the other. 50% gray goes a little darker, 50%, if you're going towards white, it's gonna go a little lighter. That's color burn. Let's take a look at linear burn. I want you to think about linear burn like multiply, okay? But with linear burn, again, you're gonna get slightly more push on the contrast and what's happening there where the layers are blending, okay? But it's more subtle, you can see that, right? Grab another color, paint into that. Go to multiply, all right, linear burn, multiply, just a little less. Look at this little area, I'm gonna circle it for you right here. Okay, see that area right there? Now, if I change this blend mode from multiply to linear burn, do you see how there's a little more contrast there? A bit more juice, a bit more action? Like I said, it's subtle, but it's there. Okay, so know the difference. All right, let's go now to darker color. Interesting. What does darker color do? Darker color is going to simply select the darker color between the two layers and make that visible. All right, so let's go ahead and let's create a new layer. We'll set it to darker color. There we go. And I'm going to grab an orange, okay, and paint that over here. Now it's slightly darker than the yellow, okay? But let's say that we have for our base color something kind of in the middle, like this brown. All right. I'll make a new layer. We set to darker color. Look at the range of values here. I'm going to go to here. All right. That blue is going to be slightly darker. If I go here and make it lighter, look what happens. The brown is going to show because the brown is darker. So it selects the darker of the two and lets that remain. Okay. So now we're going to switch over to this Renee image because it's got more interesting stuff going on. You can see some more changes happen when I go to my second category here. So for lighten, think about darken, think about lighten. Same thing, we're going to show lighter colors, okay? So if I go ahead and create a layer that's a little brighter, like this, the cool thing about this now is I can select a color, okay? We'll go ahead and we'll throw that color in there. Fill my layer with color, and this is now set to lighten. See that? So that means that those dark darks, okay, remember the lines that we're using for our figures in the background and for Renee in the foreground? Look what happens to all of them. They get pushed a little lighter and they get tinted with the color that I'm using. So if I go ahead and change that color to a blue, see what happens? Pretty cool. Now you can imagine this being really useful if you're trying to just adjust line art color in a final document, okay? And you really want to just push that and have some fun with that, right? You can kind of get like this kind of effect, like that. Pretty nifty, okay? Let's go ahead and look at screen. What does screen do? Well, screen's going to make anything lighter, okay, if the color that you have in your blending layer is lighter. So if I go here and go with a really light color, everything underneath that's lighter than that color comes on up and gets lighter, right? Now I almost never use screen unless I'm doing highlights and cool things like that in an illustration. I'll set it to screen and I'll hit it, and I'll sometimes do a couple of screen layers to go really subtle, build up that light effect. Works really, really well. What does color dodge do? So color dodge is going to do a more extreme version, okay, of darken and lighten. All right, imagine those two combining and just going nuts. So let's go ahead here and let's hit this color, kablamo. Now one of the things about color dodge you should know is that the effects you get are very different when you change your opacity versus when you change your fill, and there are a couple of layer blending modes like that. So let's go ahead and take our fill down to 50% with our color dodge. Now this is a really nice effect, okay? Let's see that, really, really nice. On, off, okay? A lot more subtle, right? Now watch what happens if I do that with opacity instead. Set that to 50, right? It's not the same effect. So for color dodge, you should know that the effect is going to be different whether you use fill, okay, or opacity. We can also try adjusting colors this way, really, really subtle. That's lovely. Look at that, okay? And remember, because I'm using a color, everything's going to get tinted, okay? Linear dodge, all right, look at this. Similar to color dodge, I like to look at linear dodge as it's a bit more subtle, and I actually do use it sometimes when I'm making color corrections or changing the colors of something at the end of an illustration. I never use lighter color, all right? But lighter color, if you think about it, is like darker color, only it's the opposite, okay? It's gonna take the color in anything that's lighter in your blend mode than what's in the original. It's gonna push it. Overlay I use all the time, but not as much as soft light. Overlay, just imagine all your midtones, okay? Lighter midtones getting slightly lighter, darker midtones getting slightly darker. It's taking everything in the image, it's tinting it with a bit of color, and it's pushing the contrast ever so slightly. It's a really nice effect. But if you really want to go nuts with this and have an excellent, easy to control effect, use soft light. Soft light's the jam. because you can take that layer and you can Command J, Command J, Command J. You can subtly build it up and duplicate and get exactly what you're looking for. Those are the ones I use the most. Everything under here, never. I don't use any of these other guys. All right, but if you want to know what these do, here's what you do. Go to the Photoshop training channel. Photoshop training channel with Jesus Ramirez. Amazing breakdown of layer blending modes and everything that they do. It will knock your socks off. So gang, that's it for today. I hope you learned a lot. Thanks for hanging out with me. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Remember to be kind. And I'll say ciao for now.